He had been the kind of boy who screamed with laughter at toy cars and fireworks, whose name was spoken with soft pride at charity luncheons. His father could buy any cure, any expert, any miracle money could buy. Then a fever on a rainy April night left him with eyes that faded like wash water. Shapes blurred, colors bled, light retreated to a dull fog. By 19 he navigated by sound, by the creak of stairs and the weight of a hand. Household staff shifted, but Maria arrived and settled like a quiet tide. She smelled faintly of jasmine soap and had palms softened from years of washing. She didn't perform pity. She read the paper aloud, brewed tea at night, learned where he kept his shirts. When he spoke about green fields she described them simply, clean and a little wild. She became a tether. Guided by her he sat on a rain-slick bench and learned to notice what sound couldn't steal. Warmth on his thigh, wet leaves against his sleeve, the cadence of footsteps on gravel. Her stories were small and, therefore, enormous. One stormy morning he told her about his father's triumphant returns and the photographs at the mansion. She laughed and told him about a woman who'd named her baby after the season. It was ordinary and ordinary felt like home. A week later he woke to the scent of citrus and rain. For the first time in years there was pressure behind his eyes, like a radio finding a station. He told Maria in the kitchen. On a whim she brushed his eyelid with the back of her hand, casual as checking for sleep. Then she cupped his face and rubbed his eyes the way someone would wipe grit from a child's cheek. Her fingers were warm and faintly rough. She smelled of soap and lime. As she kept rubbing, the room clarified. The brass teapot flashed, the coffee stain on the table took the shape of a tiny island. The edge of the window became a line he could follow with his gaze. News moved through the house like a cautious wind. Doctors returned with tests and tentative theories, spontaneous recovery, neural rerouting, delayed response to treatment. They spoke in measured terms. His father, torn between skepticism and hope, ordered scans. The household speculated and reporters sniffed at the gate. Maria explained simply, she didn't perform miracles. I just did what I do when grit gets in a child's eye, she said. Her plainness made people uncomfortable because it didn't fit the tidy story everyone wanted. The recovery continued in increments. Therapists taught him to follow a pen to rebuild depth. When he read a sentence and recognized the shape of a word, he wept. Maria turned exercises into games, dangling ribbons and laughing when his hands missed. Her presence made rehabilitation feel less like a project and more like a reclaiming. As sight returned, he began to see more than objects. He noticed the way people looked when they lied, how favors tasted in smiles, how his father's allies polished their expressions for advantage. He also noticed Maria's hands, the small scars on her knuckles, the way calluses folded like maps. He realized the miracle wasn't just about light but about how someone's care could change trajectory. Hospital nights blurred into memory. Decisions were once made like ships but Maria became an anchor. The therapist moved a pen slowly and told him to follow it. He did, and the world made a new law. Motion belonged to him again. Each successful follow was a victory so delicate it required celebration. Laughter in the rehab wing felt like a private miracle. Reporters tried to name the event. Offers for interviews and dramatizations arrived, but Maria refused. Powerful people wanted to turn human grace into currency. He told his father he would not allow Maria to be paraded. They argued. The son insisted on protecting her privacy. Maria visited the hospital and spoke simply about bandaging her nephew's knees. People listened. She spoke of being calm when a small body was fevered and afraid. At home he shared the unbearable memory of darkness. Not just the lack of light, but the loneliness of being held in a world that had moved on without him. Months later he volunteered at a clinic and spoke gently to a boy who learned he didn't always have to be brave. He remembered the small mercies that had steadied him and found he wanted to pass them on. Some relatives wanted to commercialize the story. He refused and redirected funds to train caretakers in neighborhoods. Maria trained in nursing. She taught students that listening with your hands was a real skill. She said the same thing she had told him, you learn to listen with your hands. People who had watched the miracle expected grand speeches. She gave practical lessons and quiet example instead. Years later, a clinic student he had helped returned to volunteer, and the circle felt right. A boy who had been soothed by small mercies grew into someone who could offer them. The living geometry of that exchange mattered more than headlines or profit. At night he thought of Maria's first touch. The father learned to listen and sometimes sat with patience. Wealth still bought comfort, but it could also buy responsibility in programs that mattered. The estate kept its marble and its privacy, but it also opened a clinic and a training program for caregivers in the city. The father's gestures toward service were clumsy at first and then, surprisingly, genuine. On the anniversary of his recovery, he walked Maria through the garden where the roses had grown thick and wild. They stopped by the bench that had first been their map. "Do you think it was luck?" he asked. She considered this, fingers folding in her lap. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe 1,000 hands doing small things, until one of those hands found you." He smiled. He had a life that felt like an answer and not a question. He had sight and the humility it required. He had a father who had learned to let go in small ways in a city that had one more clinic. Maria had her evenings of classes and a quiet reputation among neighbors who nodded at her at markets. The miracle lost its spectacle and kept the pulse of the ordinary.